දවස් 30ක්ම unlimited Netflix බලන්න. unlimited data pack එකක් මුළු පවුලටම unlimited fun එකක් අරගන්න. අදම active කරගන්න.
ලෙන්ගතුකම වැඩි කරගන්න ලව්ජු රුපියල් 50ට අඩු කළා.
මාමේ එන්න අපිට එකක් බොමු.
Defying limitations, inspiring Sri Lankan quadriplegic physician named Queensland's Australian of the Year. Danger zone. Deaths continue to rise, with 4 more reported today as the Colombo district continues to be the worst hit with 251 new cases. Halting the spread, Army commander announces total ban on travel out of the Western province after President Gotabaya orders stricter controls. Early preparations, WHO country representative Dr. Razia Penze says government needs to get ready for vaccine availability.
It is important to have a national plan for the deployment of COVID-19 vaccine that would include prioritization of population groups, mechanisms or platforms for delivery of vaccine.
All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9. This Wednesday, the 11th of November, 2020.
නව sunlight sakura. දැන් දික්කල් පවතින sakura මල් සුවඳින්.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
As we hear stories of vast limitations brought on by the pandemic, some others are breaking barriers and showing the world that limitations can sometimes inspire you to amazing feats of excellence. Sri Lankan-born physician Dr. Dinesh Palipana, who defied the odds to finish medical school in Queensland despite his quadriplegia, has been named the state's Australian of the Year. The 36-year-old physician, who was left without the use of his legs and partial use of his arms following a 2010 car crash, has been recognized for his advocacy on the treatment of the disabled, his contributions to the advancement of spinal injury treatment, and his efforts in drafting national policies, medical education and employment of the disabled.
The state of Queensland in Australia has conferred the title of Australian of the Year on Sri Lankan-born physician Dr. Dinesh Palipana. He was named by Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk at a special presentation yesterday ahead of the National Australia Day Awards in January. This is in addition to having been awarded the country's highest civilian honour last year, the Order of Australia Medal. Dr. Palipana, who is Queensland's first quadriplegic medical graduate and medical intern, has been recognised for his advocacy work on the equitable treatment of people with a disability and significant contributions to the advancement of treating spinal cord injuries and restoring functions for people with paralysis. Most of his work has been through an organisation founded by him called Doctors with Disabilities that has contributed immensely to spinal research in the country. His work through the organisation also includes assistance in creating national policies for inclusivity in medical education and employment. Dr. Palipana was seriously injured in a car crash in 2010 that deprived him of the use of his legs and left him with limited use of his arms. Last year, he began research on equipment that could in the future help people with disabilities walk or even ride a bike again. Dr. Palipana is currently a senior resident at the Gold Coast University Hospital and is a recent law graduate, in addition to functioning as the official physician for the Gold Coast Titans Physical Disability Rugby League team.
Now, World Health Organization country representative Dr. Razia Penze says that Sri Lanka must prepare the groundwork for a future vaccine by drafting a national plan that includes prioritization of population groups as well as mechanisms and platforms for its delivery. Dr. Penze revealed that with 47 vaccines currently in human trials, out of a total of 200 possible candidates and 10 others in phase 3 trials, the first batch of approved doses from the COVAX facility could be expected by the end of 2021.
World Health Organization country representative Dr. Razia Penze says that with over 200 COVID-19 vaccines currently in development, Things are looking promising on the vaccine front, but the final word remains subject to regulatory assessments and trial results that could be expected for some of them at the end of this year.
Currently, around 200 candidate vaccines are at some stage of development. Of these, at least 47 candidate vaccines are in human trials. About 10 of these are in phase 3 trials. Phase 3 trials of some of the candidate vaccines began in July 2020. We expect that the results of these trials will come at the end of the year, and possibly some results may come by November. After the data is available, regulatory authorities will need to assess the safety and efficacy, and then the manufacturing for approved vaccines will begin. Given this timeline, we expect that the doses would begin to arrive in countries by middle of 2021. A limited number of vaccine doses may be available starting the first quarter of 2021. The COVAX facility is speeding up the search for an effective vaccine for all countries, and we expect that 2 billion doses would be available by the end of 2021. These would be prioritized for vulnerable groups like health workers and elderly population. For this, WHO has developed a fair allocation framework. This will happen in phases. So phase 1, an initial proportional allocation to all countries, where they will progressively receive doses until all countries reach 20% of their population. The phase 2 will be an expanded coverage to other population groups, and if severe supply chain persists, then a weighted allocation approach would be adopted, taking into account the country's COVID threat and vulnerability.
Dr. Penze added that the government needs to prepare itself for the availability of a successful vaccine, including prioritizing population groups and setting out possible delivery mechanisms.
And while the country awaits delivery of vaccine doses, it is important to have a national plan for the deployment of COVID-19 vaccine that would include prioritization of population groups, mechanisms or platforms for delivery of vaccine, health system requirements, regulatory requirements, vaccine safety monitoring mechanisms, communication strategies, and budgeting and financing framework for co-payment of these vaccines. Safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine. Governments must continue the comprehensive approach to find, test, isolate and treat for cases, trace and quarantine their contacts, ensure infection prevention and control measures to protect health workers and other frontline workers, protect vulnerable populations, and ensure continuity of essential health services, including those for mental health and psychosocial well-being.
Sri Lanka's death toll reached 45 with 4 more deaths reported today. With the deaths on the rise, Chief Epidemiologist Dr. Sudat Samaravira says that the committee report providing analysis into the rise in COVID-19 deaths will be ready in a week's time. Further, the island's total number of infections since the beginning of the pandemic surpassed the 15,000 mark today.
The number of COVID-19 related fatalities in Sri Lanka continues to rise, with 4 more patients succumbing to the virus during the last cycle, raising the total to 45 deaths so far. The 41st COVID-19 related death reported last night was that of a 48-year-old cancer patient residing in Ragama who passed away at home. A post-mortem conducted at the Ragama hospital confirmed his diagnosis, and his cause of death was reported as cancer-related complications exacerbated by the virus. The 42nd victim was an 80-year-old resident of Panadura who died on admission to the police hospital. His diagnosis too was confirmed during the post-mortem, and his cause of death was said to be cardiac arrest brought on by COVID-19. Meanwhile, the 43rd death from the coronavirus was reported to be a 40-year-old man from Colombo 11 who passed away on admission to the National Hospital in Colombo. His cause of death has been reported as cardiac arrest caused by the virus. Further, a 45-year-old Kalania resident was the 44th COVID-19 victim reported after he too succumbed to cardiac arrest caused by COVID-19 complications. With that, the number of coronavirus-related deaths since the 1st of this month has increased to 26.
There is an increased number of deaths associated with COVID. Sometimes these deaths could be due to the direct influence of COVID, like having pneumonia because of COVID, as well as there could be some people who are having chronic illnesses, but sometimes it could be coincidental or accidental combination. Even though the person who is dying is having COVID, that COVID infection may not be contributing to the death. If this death occurred at home or somewhere else, whether there is any delay from the health services or whether there is a delay in the health seeking behaviors among the people, and also whether there are any errors that can be rectified, needed to be analyzed and understand. The Director General of Health Services has appointed an expert committee to investigate into all the deaths and to submit a report. We expect that this report will be ready by 1 week time.
Meanwhile, infections from the Minuwangoda apparel factory cluster and the Paliagoda fish market cluster have increased to 11,233 following detection of 430 new cases during yesterday. Of these, 251 cases were confirmed in the Colombo district, the highest single-day infections reported from the district. Out of these, 234 were reported to have been detected within the Colombo municipality limits, with 55 among them from Kolpiti alone. In addition, 32 infections were detected from the area of Grand Pass, 28 from Colombo Fort, 25 from Keselvatta, 20 from Maligavatta and 20 more from Maradana. In the meantime, 14 Indian nationals employed at a construction site in Colombo were found to be COVID-19 positive. The construction workers had tested positive for the virus following random PCR tests conducted on 50 workers at the site. Meanwhile, in Gampaha, the number of fresh cases are on the decline, with just 18 infections being detected yesterday. The other districts reporting new infections are Kalutara, Ratnapura and Kegol, with 16, 8 and 7 cases respectively. Furthermore, the Putlam district recorded 6 new cases, Kandy 4, Gaul 2 and Batiklo, Norelia and Trincomalee with 1 case each. Infections were also confirmed among police personnel, prison inmates and the Gurugoda factory, all sub-clusters of the Paliagoda and Minuwangoda clusters. A total of 91 police officers were reported among yesterday's infections, with 82 of them from the Fort police station who had been placed in quarantine. With that, the number of infected police personnel has risen to 612.
A police sub-cluster has been created in respect of COVID positive patients. We identified the risk in respect of COVID-19. So therefore, we isolated approximately 3,000 police officers as first, second and third contacts of those officers who were initially found positive. And we sent them to 9 quarantine centers. It is seen in the media that the COVID positive patients in respect of police are found. All these cases are found from the quarantine centers. So therefore, the disease has not been spread to the police community. We have 90,000 police officers throughout the country. So 87,000 police officers, they perform their duties smoothly.
Also among new infections are 23 inmates of the Bogambara prison and 1 inmate from the Kuruvita prison, raising the number of confirmed cases at the country's prisons to 132. In addition, 4 more employees of the Gurugoda apparel factory have tested positive for the virus yesterday, increasing the total infections stemming from the factory to 212. With that, 43 confirmed patients have been admitted to the COVID-19 treatment centre in Koggala. They have been identified as residents of Vadua, Millania, Maduravala, Horana, Ingiriya and Bulat Singhala. In other developments, 325 Sri Lankan nationals employed in the United Arab Emirates have arrived in Sri Lanka aboard 2 charter flights. 50 of the expat workers arrived at the Katunayaka International Airport at 11 p.m. last night, while the rest arrived this morning. Further, a group of 76 Sri Lanka Army personnel who had travelled to various African countries on UN peacekeeping duties arrived back in the country this morning. In addition, another aircraft carrying 66 Sri Lankans who were stranded in India arrived at 8:50 a.m. today. All returnees were subjected to PCR test at the airport premises and were directed to quarantine centres run by the Tri-Forces. In the meantime, with the addition of 309 new cases, the number of COVID-19 infections reported since the beginning of the pandemic in the country rose to 15,024. Further, with 646 patients discharged from hospitals today, the number of recoveries increased to 10,183, bringing active cases down to 4,797.
Safeguard hand sanitizer. නවතම නිෂ්පාදන පෙළ නීරෝගිමත් දිවියකට.
Now, recognizing the growing number of cases in the Western Province, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa instructed officials to take immediate measures to prevent movement of the Western Province residents to other districts today. Accordingly, Army Commander Lieutenant General Shavendra Silva announced an immediate ban on movements out of the Western Province, which will remain in effect until midnight of the 15th of this month. I'm connecting live with the Commander of the Sri Lanka Army, Lieutenant General Shavendra Silva, now via telephone to find out more about this restriction. Commander?
Good evening to you.
Good evening to you. I think movement restrictions in the Western Province as a whole. Now, this could be an extension to the kind of limitations, to the strategic measures that the government and authorities are taking. What are we telling our people now?
Yeah, no, as you know that because we have got so far the numbers that we are getting, the quite positive cases, the majority are from the Western Province. Even yesterday, the numbers, as of today, the numbers that we are getting are from the Western Province. And as you know, there is a control in the other parts of Sri Lanka. So therefore, as a precautionary measure, where this can be spread to other parts of Sri Lanka, the government has decided to prohibit the people of Western Province in traveling to other areas. And this is not for a long period, but also only for a short period, that is till the 15th, that is Sunday midnight, with immediate effected around 7:30 p.m. this evening. And people will not be allowed to move out of Western Province. Not only that, we request the people of even Western Province, unless otherwise there's a real requirement to restrict yourself to the district that you live, that is in Colombo, Kalutara, or even Gampaha. And also we request kindly from the people of Sri Lanka that even those who live out of Western Province, during coming days, that it's good that if you could restrict your movement within your districts, rather moving out to various other parts of Sri Lanka. Especially we are in a state we do not know who has got COVID or not.
Very quickly, Commander, now the essential services and emergency services, how does that happen in this situation?
Yeah, of course, that there's a mechanism under the leadership of Honorable Basil Rajapaksa, even when the country was locked down over a period of even 1 month during March-April period, that a task force is established by the government, and they continue doing that at that time. And even now, as of now, you know that we have made a certain, within Western Province and even other parts, there are isolated police areas. Therefore, so we believe that there's a mechanism to provide the essential food items, medicine, and other services. So that will continue. Even we are not prohibited people to come in. The essential services will continue within this Western Province, and that will continue. But we will not allow anyone to move out. I don't think that anyone is required to go, any essential services are required to go out of Colombo. It's very limited. So as and when, if there's a situation like that, that will be considered by the police. But otherwise, we request people to be within Western Province or within the district that you live.
Thank you very much, Commander, for your time. Moving on to other local news, the police media spokesperson DIG Ajit Rohana says a stricter monitoring of isolated areas will take place with immediate effect, using additional police personnel to man all entry points. He also warned the public not to test the patience of the police by attempting to circumvent the restrictions.
Despite the quarantine curfew being lifted in most areas of the Western Province on Monday, several areas in the Gampaha, Colombo and Kalutara districts remained isolated due to increased COVID-19 cases being reported. Since then, however, no new areas have been ordered to be placed under isolation. Further, in addition to the areas in the Western Province, several areas in the Kurunagal and Kegal districts too are still under isolation.
A decision was taken to strictly implement the restriction of public movements in lockdown areas and isolated areas. So therefore, the police are going to deploy additional strength on the borders of isolated and lockdown areas. From today, no one is allowed to leave or no one is allowed to enter into the isolated areas. If any person disobeys with this rule or the quarantine order, he will be dealt with the law and he will be arrested and produced in courts. However, it has been decided to allow the members of essential services to operate in the area in order to provide food and drugs to the inmates of the area, and this particular system is the only exception against the quarantine order.
Meanwhile, the Manning Market in Peta, which was expected to recommence trade operations following the lifting of the curfew, still remains closed after several workers tested positive. With traders inconvenienced and unable to find a market for their produce, steps were taken by the Minister of Agriculture to use State Engineering Corporation premises in Paliagoda as an alternative location for trade activities from next Monday. However, the Manning Market Trade Union has pushed back against the move, expressing opposition and unwillingness to shift their trade operations to the new location. Union representatives have called for activities to be shifted to a building constructed for the new marketplace in Paliagoda. Meanwhile, representatives of the Manning Market Trade Union met with the Minister of Agriculture, Mahindananda Ludgamage, this afternoon. Following the meeting, the trade union revealed that the minister has given an assurance that the market will be shifted to a new market building in Paliagoda within the space of a week. Meanwhile, members of the public in the Hatton town were observed violating quarantine regulations while shopping in the run-up to the Deepavali festival. What's more, similar violations were witnessed among employees at the Dambula Economic Centre as well.
Ceylon Bank, the bank with a heart.
Welcome back. Following the increase in bus fares for both private and state-owned bus services that came into effect last night, Chairman of Sri Lanka Private Bus Owners Association Gamanu Wijeratne has accused the Ministry of Transport of not consulting private bus operators when deciding on revisions in line with the new transport regulations. Bus fares were increased by 1.2% as of midnight last night. However, members of the public seem to have accepted the fare hikes as necessary given the current COVID-19 threat in the country.
Last night, the Ministry of Transport announced a host of changes to transport regulations, including a revision of bus fares in line with the current COVID-19 situation. Accordingly, fares for private buses and buses operating under the Sri Lanka Transport Board were increased by 1.2% as of midnight last night.
විශේෂයෙන්ම මේ වැඩි කිරීම සිදු කරලා තියෙන්නේ බස් රථවල යන මගී සංඛ්‍යාවේ අඩුවීම නිසා ඒ අනුව පවතින බස් ගාස්තුව රුපියල් 12 14 දක්වාත් 14 වූ බස් ගාස්තුව 17 දක්වාත් 19ක් වූ බස් ගාස්තුව 23 දක්වාත් වැඩි කරන්නට කටයුතු කරලා තියෙනවා. ඊට සමගාමීව ශ්‍රී ලංකා ගමනාගමන මණ්ඩලයත් මේක ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්නට මේ ආකාරයට බස් රථ ගාස්තුව වැඩි කරන්නට කටයුතු කරනවා. ගාස්තු සංශෝධනයත් සමග කිසියම් ආකාරයකට සහනයක් පෞද්ගලික සහ ශ්‍රී ලංකා ගමනාගමන මණ්ඩලයට ලැබෙයි කියලා විශ්වාස කරනවා. කොවිඩ් තත්ත්වයෙන් පහ වුණාට පසුව සාමාන්‍ය පරිදි මගින් ප්‍රවාහනය කරන්නට අවකාශය ලැබුණාම මේ බස් රථ ගාස්තුව පෙර බස් රථ ගාස්තුව දක්වා අඩුවීමක් සිදු වෙනවා.
In the meantime, Chairman of the Sri Lanka Private Bus Owners Association Gamanu Wijeratne alleged that the bus fare revisions were implemented without consulting private bus owners and stated that the government must implement the third option of its transport strategy instead of the second one that is currently in place. Meanwhile, the general public expressed their thoughts on the bus fare revisions.
බස් ගාස්තු කොහමද අද? ඊටි වශයෙන් රුපියල් 5,000ක් විතර වැඩි වෙලා තියෙනවා. වෙලාවේ හැටියට ඉතින් ඒක එක එකකට සාධාරණයි කියලා යක්කල ඉඳන් කොළඹට ආවේ. කලින් 60 ගත්තා මෙයාට අද රුපියල් 2ක් වෙලා තියෙනවා නේ. රුපියල් 2ක් කරලා. මිනිස්සුන්ට තරහ ගන්න වෙනවා මහත්තයා. කරන්න දෙන්නේ නැහැ. සැනිටයිසර්ස් දීලා උණ චෙක් කරලා එහෙමද බස් එකට ගත්තේ? එහෙම නම් ගන්න නැහැ. ඉතින් ගොඩක් තැන්වල. සැනිටයිසර් එක දෙනවා කටට පොඩ්ඩක් ගා ගන්න. සමලිපිනේ පොතක ලියලා ඒ වගේ ආරසක එහෙම නම් තිබුණා කියලා මම දැක්කා.
Meanwhile, police media spokesperson DIG Ajit Rohana announced that a hotline has been introduced for members of the public requiring emergency ambulance services in areas under lockdown in Colombo and Gampaha. Hence, from today onwards, members of the public can call 011 342 2558 for ambulance assistance.
The maximum retail price of packeted white sugar has been declared at 90 rupees per kilogram, while the maximum retail price of a kilogram of bulk white sugar has been set at 85 rupees. In the meantime, the maximum wholesale price of white sugar will be followed by importers has been set at 80 rupees per kilogram. And that wraps up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for watching. Good night.